go around.
Oh.
The Reparations Museum is like a church.
Okay.
You walk in, I've never seen a museum.
I've been to the whole thing.
Yeah, but this you walk in, it's got everything in there, just like you do. What do you mean? You go in, you fly. Because it's like. I'm sure you've already been welcomed to the Delta, so I'll repeat myself and say we're happy to have you here, where it's rich in history, where we're still trying to pull up some history. We're trying to find history where it has somehow disappeared. We had a fantastic year, I think it was last year, when Professor Ortiz, or maybe it was 2 years ago, when Professor Ortiz was here. And I'm supposed to talk to you about Ferguson, Missouri.
Ferguson, Missouri.
Oh, excuse me. Ferguson, Arkansas.
Whoops.
Hey, now that was a joke. 2 different places,
Yeah.
yet the same name.
Same things, yeah.
Ferguson, Arkansas. A little place on the Delta where had a population maybe of 150, maybe 200 people. I wasn't born there, but I was born in West Helena, Arkansas. But I went to live in Ferguson back in the 40s. And by that time, most of the lands that were owned by African Americans had disappeared. But my grandma, and this is what I really love about my grandma, Ferguson, and also my wife's grandfather, they weren't afraid to talk about what happened. Today, for some reason, people are still afraid to speak about it as if they were at that wall where they said it had ears. But my grandma, who was Irene Ferguson Hollis, as a very young person, would talk to me about Ferguson. That mostly was black owned during that time. The Ferguson were permanent people of that time. Harrison Ferguson, Simon Ferguson, Joe Ferguson, Irene Ferguson. They owned property. Joe Ferguson was the first postmaster in that area, black postmaster in that area. The Ferguson men owned a cotton gin where they would process the cotton. But over a period of years, somehow all was lost, and yet someone else possessed it or gained it. And usually that's what happens when there's infighting. There's someone standing there waiting to take over the spoil. I don't know if that makes sense or not. And this is what happened, according to my grandma Ferguson. And they lost everything. I mean, everything. And of course, there were other black owners in that area, the Shears. I was remembering these names last night, and it's sad I can't really think of them today. But the land was, I'd say 99% black owned during that day. And today, it's 100% Caucasian owned. And you think about the period of years, what, some 50 years or 60 years, how in the world does this happen? And it seemed to me there had to be an undercurrent that would allow this much shift in power. But they lost it all. They lost it all. And now Dr. Olson is so adamant about me taking you back to the area where I grew up, and that was Ferguson, where I confessed the hope in Christ there. The little church is still standing, and for course we had two churches in the area at the time, an African American church and a United Baptist church, and I was born into the Baptist church. The African American church is no longer there. And really there's no longer a resemblance of what I remembered as a young child growing up. There was a marker which denotes Ferguson on the railroad. Somehow that disappeared. Don't know where it went, but it disappeared. But I still remember the spot. And that, I'm 84 years old, but I still remember, I still have those childhood memories, and remember how we worked in the field, how we farmed our land, how we got a settlement 1 year for $1. And this is partially the reason all of this happened, because we had someone seemingly a little smoother, cleverer than we were, who were able to sort of beat you out of what you had worked for. Now, all weren't sharecroppers back during that day, because we had a lot of landowners. The majority of the land was owned by African Americans. I'm told by Mr. Roy that they bought land for $1 an acre. Isn't that something? $1 an acre. I don't know how much it costs now. But through it all, they lost it all. And seemingly, whomever sort of grasped it. And I made a statement. I said, well, what are you going to say? We had a meeting here at the closing remarks, and I said, just give it back. And I was told I was out of my mind. So I know they aren't going to give it back, and I'm not sure how we can take it back. And yet, I shared with a group from Chicago that if I were to have 100 acres, 150 acres, or 200 acres, at this day and time, I really don't know what I'd do with it. Because farming has become so complex, the equipment, et cetera, is so expensive, that I would not be able to maintain it, all right? But it would be great to receive compensation that my four parents missed during this time. Basically, this is what your tour is about today. Do I hear a question?
All right, I'm gonna back you up.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Quiney.
Yes.
Mr. Quiney has an amazing love story that I think everybody should hear because it also ties into when we're driving from here to Ferguson. I think they should hear that story, Mr. Quiney. Is it okay to share that? About your wife, how you walked here from there.
Okay. Well, you know, what was that? Was it a song? So I crossed many rivers. Is that a song or a picture or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my wife was born and raised here in Elaine, and it was her grandfather who shared so much with us about the massacre. And I'm happy that they've changed that from a riot to a massacre, because that's precisely what it was, according to his description. But during my early years as a teenager, I would come to Elaine. I played on the baseball team. I had a very good friend, James Rogers, who one Sunday afternoon, brought this lovely young lady out where I was playing and introduced her to me. We introduced us. Her name was Willie Mae Cook. Now, I never met her, never heard of her. In fact, where we were playing ball was only maybe a couple of blocks from where she lived. Her dad was in business. He owned a grocery store here. He was a butcher. But he introduced us, and godly, that was one of the greatest experiences that I think I've ever had. He was her best friend. He was also my best friend, and yet we did not know each other. But I was so impressed with her that I would walk 15 miles to see her. This is down in the Ferguson area. I'd walk from there to Elaine just to see her, say hello, and we'd hold hands on their steps. And then I had a long walk back to Elaine. And I did that for several years. And I said, wow.
That's love.
I said, I said, now, you know, I'm doing all this walking. and her dad, my dad really wasn't a mean man, but he kept such a close range on her. I couldn't stay but just a little bit, but just a little bit was enough. And those 15 miles, and so it goes back to the story of the young man who worked all of the years for the love of his life, and it seemed like it was just that long. Well, that's the way it was with me. I would come and I mean, I would just, I could step it. I could really step it. And then when I'd get there and knock on the door, and she'd come in, she said, come in. Her mother was lying ill. And just a hello, a hug, hello to her mom. And I knew I couldn't stay long.
Water.
So then I had to hit the road.
Yeah,
I'd walk back to
thank you.
to Ferguson.
Thank you. Yeah,
But one day that changed. I asked for her hand in marriage. Now I talked with her parents, and they gave consent. Let me tell you something. It's been one of the most wonderful 63 years
63 years.
that I believe a person could have in marriage.
Okay.
63 glorious years. All of our children are grown and married. God blessed us with beautiful children. And I just thank you. Thank you for
No problem.
that.
That's one of my favorite stories. Thank you, Mr. Quiney. Thank you, Mr. Quiney, for sharing. I hope I didn't overstep by
That's all right.
asking you
That's
for
all
that.
right.
It's such
That's
a,
all right. That's all right.
it's such a powerful story, and when you're driving, you can think, oh, Mr. Quiney used to walk all this way, back and forth, imagine. And then 63 years, that's like, wow, it's impressive. So my name is Jennifer Hadlock. I live in New York City. I was actually born in California, moved around a lot. Never been to the Delta before I came to Elaine a few months ago. And I have now been here a month. And I've learned so much, and I'm so thankful to everyone who's spoken with me from the Elaine Legacy Center. And I came because I'm part of an organization called the Fund for Reparations Now. And the organization is trying to bring together white folks or European descended folks in the United States to start paying in and apologizing and beginning the process of reparations for Black people due to slavery and all the harms that have come since. We're working with the National African American Reparations Commission, which has a 10-point plan of how to provide reparations. And the Legacy Center and the museum is one of our first places that we've contributed to. And we're very excited to be working together. So I'm here because I am also a social worker and an attorney. Really, I'm a community organizer, but I went to law school and social work school, passed the bar in Connecticut. And I'm here because the oral histories are amazing and we should just believe them. But white people like papers and documents. And in talking to the white folks here in town, without that, it's going to be hard for them to believe. So I am here to back up the oral history, to put any documents I can find to show support for the stories that people are telling. So you just heard the story from Mr. Quiney about Ferguson, Arkansas. And I'm going to show you some of what I found so far. Could go to the next slide, James. And I did slides because I think generation millennials and Gen Z like slides. Okay, so I'm trying to show that Black families owned land before 1919. Like Nan said, and like Mr. Quiney said, this is very, very important to the descendants of the massacre, that before the massacre, the story is like, always, if you look at how people describe what happened, they always say the sharecroppers, the sharecroppers, the sharecroppers, like no Black people own land. That is definitely not true. Black people did own land before the massacre. I have found much documentation to that. show that black farmers owned land before 1919 and whether or not they did after. And that I have found mixed things about when exactly people lost land. Like Mr. Quiney said, by 1940s and 50s, a lot of the land is lost, and figuring out exactly how and why is very complicated. And I'm also trying to show that white folks acquired or stole land shortly after the massacre. I have also found that documented. Go ahead. There's a whole bunch of more specific questions, but the one I'm going to talk about with you all today is Ferguson. How and why is it being erased? Go ahead. Why are we doing this? I think I erased this slide, sorry, I copied this from another presentation, but why are we doing this is to back up the oral history stories. Go ahead. We want to get to a reparations, and we actually have had our first meeting of Descendants to start talking about what would reparations mean, and like what Mr. Quiney said, would just getting the land back be what Descendants want at this point? Would they just want money? Both of those things are not actually going to repair. So we have to think about what are the many possibilities, and there are many, many possibilities. Go ahead. The museum is going to have oral histories, which you all are helping to collect. And if you've ever been to the Memphis National Civil Rights Museum, I went there last weekend, and they have a really nice setup of oral histories where you can hear different people's stories, and I think that is what will be happening at the museum, is some of these oral histories will be there, and then we'll have documents to back up what people are saying. Go ahead. Some of what I'm going to talk about is hard to hear and painful, and so take care of yourself if you need to take a break. I will try to speak in ways that aren't going to cause harm, but I'm me, so I might, and I apologize for that, but go ahead, Mr. White. Okay, so in the early 1800s, there are documents at the courthouse that show when white people first got land. So the president at the time, right there, James Monroe, I know it's hard to see. I have to figure out how to do that. If anybody has technical skills about how to zoom in and make the pictures look good, help. But that's James Monroe giving 360 acres to a white guy. And there are lots and lots of these. Obviously in 1820, black people were enslaved. Most black people were enslaved here. And the Trail of Tears was happening. Indigenous people were being moved off the land, and white people were getting the land, just being granted it. Go ahead. Okay, in the courthouse, there's actually a book that lists all the white people who got land in the 1840s and 50s, and one name that stood out a lot to me, which I haven't heard people talk about, is Silas Craig. He got tons and tons of land. Now, why he got so much, I thought, oh, you're only supposed to get one kind of grant. No, he got a whole bunch of land. Why, I don't know yet. Go ahead, James. Okay. I don't know why it's showing my graphics before the document, but anyway. So before I came, I'm also a genealogist, and I was trying to do research before I came on ancestry and family search. Like, I should be able to find Ferguson and Elaine. You know, you plug in the name of the town and it should pull up. No, that was not happening. Ferguson and Elaine, like, they don't even exist. Why is that? Well, that's part of the erasure. So it does say right here, Ferguson on this. This is a 1920 census, so it's right after the massacre. Up here, though, it doesn't say Ferguson. This is where usually the town would be. It says Mooney. So when you search, you have to search for Mooney. I learned that after I came here, so now I'm able to find more things. But right here, it does actually say Ferguson, Arkansas. So somebody wanted to make sure people knew it was Ferguson. And right here is ownership. Now, and these are all black people, see, B, 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 B. Renting, but owning, right here.
Why did it say Rudy? Why did it say Rudy?
I'm going to show you the map that helped me understand. I do not know, but that's what they call it, Mooney, and they actually call the Elaine area Tappan, which is, of course, one of the Confederate generals that you saw at the park. Well, that's right. Whoops. Oh, slides. They're helpful, and then they're a pain in the butt. Okay, so in 1910, Jordan Ferguson is a general farmer, and he owns land. And that's before the massacre, and he's black. So you see here it says day laborer, and it says farmer, laborer. Some of these, the person says sharecropper. This one says merchant. So say, some of them say tenant farmer. So they call people different things. Some of them say planter. That's the big owner. But definitely people are saying, I'm a farmer and I own the land, which goes against what the story is.
Mr. Quiney?
What?
Same Ferguson?
That's in Ferguson that Mr. Quiney was talking about, yes.
Are those his family? Because he mentioned his grandmother.
Yes. I think it's the uncle. So in 1920, after the massacre, he owns a house and he has his own account, it says. And it is mortgaged. It's not, if it's free, that means they totally paid off the mortgage, but it is mortgaged. But you see it says Mooney, but that is in Ferguson. Go ahead. And Mr. Quiney mentioned the postmaster. So in 1899, the postmaster was at Ferguson. It's real, it exists. And 1899, it is a black man who is the postmaster. Now, if you're not from a rural area, you don't realize, I think, how important the post office is, and how meaningful, like that is the one place that everybody goes because everybody gets mail, and it is an important role. They do more than just collect the mail. But this is a document that has all the different towns, and it lists him as the postmaster. And Isaac Ferguson had so much land that he was able to give some to the Precious Grove Church of Ferguson. Did you know that?
I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't.
And I found the Precious Grove Church. It's still there.
It is. It is.
So you'll see it today. But I thought that was pretty powerful. They had so much land. And this is when? March
1919, yeah.
When did the massacre happen? September 30th, 1919.
Yeah.
So this is 6 months before. So there are different ways the land may have been taken. Go ahead. Oh, that's a whole nother story that Mr. Quiney didn't tell you, but go ahead, keep going. So this is in 1919. In November 1919, or sorry, October 1919, after the massacre, 4,760 acres went between two white people. How did Theo Fathauer get this land? I haven't been able to figure that out totally. But this is how much land was passing right after the massacre to the Solomons. $600,000 in 1919. That's a lot of money in 1919.
Yeah.
Right there. Yep. Go ahead. So, yeah.
Any relation to the Solomons?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes. They're all related. Yeah.
Is that his grandfather?
Yeah, it might be his great uncle. There were 4 brothers, Solomon brothers at that time, but they're all interrelated. It's all.
Have you brought this up to Mr. Solomon at this point? And like, hey,
I have not talked to Mr. Solomon. I have been asked not to talk to him. Until we have all the documents that we want, we don't want to get him questioning and knowing what I'm doing there. Yeah. So there's lists of forfeitures for non-payment of taxes. Do you see the numbers here? The amount that people owe is so small.
$8.
Yes, $8. And their land is taken away. It's like so painful to look at it. But there's pages and pages like this. And mostly it's, I think, that people didn't even know that they probably owed that amount. But also people were borrowing and not knowing that I'm signing away all my land to borrow $300 to be able to get all my crops and things I need to grow things this year, and then I owe that, and something happens and you don't get enough money, or somebody screws you over, and then you can't pay it back, and then you lose your land for such small amounts of money. Go ahead. The railroads also were coming through at this time. This is 1917. Deeds and mortgages by the Missouri Pacific Railroad Company. Millions and millions of dollars being discussed in this book. And big owners like the Solomons and other families were making deals with the railroad. They would get paid every year thousands of dollars to have them store things that they needed to store. Like they would bring equipment and things that they're building the railroad and they needed to put it somewhere. They would pay these big owners to be able to put it on their land and to go on the land and to cross their land and put things. They also were making money, and taking land from people for $8. One thing that struck me when I first went into the room with all the books in the courthouse was there's from 1820, there's books and books and books of deeds and mortgages. The first year that there's anything about oil and gas is 1919. And there's one book that says 1919, oil and gas leases. So I was like, that's weird that starts that year. Suddenly there's all these leases for land for gas companies and oil companies to go on the land and look to see if there's oil or gas. So at that time, people were finding oil and gas in other parts, like in Texas and other places in the Southeast. So people who want to make money are just thinking about it as, I might strike it rich by finding this. So they're willing to pay this. And so people who understood it are making lots of money on that. Go ahead. Also, they're building the levees. Thank you. They're building the levees that exist now, and there's a lot of money in that too. I don't understand enough about the levees. That's a whole other area to explore. And New Orleans, I think about levees, but the levee is really important here in the Mississippi River. Where they put the levees, when they built the levees, how they built the levees, with what labor. There's another spot. I don't know if we're going to go by it or if it's further south than Ferguson. Laconia Circle.
Down below Ferguson. Yeah.
Near Snow Lake. That had all these wealthy owners that were making money off of the levees. Yeah, go on.
Could the levees have been used to take black land as well?
Yes, I think so. I don't have proof of that, but I think, yeah. So, what questions do you have? What could repair this? What would reparations for all this theft look like? And this, like Mary said, Elaine and this story is a microcosm. It's like ground zero to me. I don't know if you all saw the New York Times article that the Montgomery Lynching Museum did a report that came out, I think it was last year, where they showed, or maybe it was 2019, where they had a map that showed where all of the lynchings happened that they've been able to document, and the dot for the biggest spot was here. They considered the massacre lynchings. And this spot is, and the fear on both that the white people have from hearing the story about how black people are going to kill us, that's the story they're told over and over again. And the fear that black people have about what the white people actually did, actually killed people, is so intense here. I've been to Northern Ireland and could feel it there too, that like us and them and not talking to each other. I've been to Germany, could feel it there. So they're just, I've not been to Israel and Palestine, but I'm sure it's similar intensity. That super intense feeling on fear on both sides where you can't talk to each other. And the white people just pretend it's over, it's done, we don't have to worry about that. The story they've told me is, oh, that lady came from outside, Mary, and stirred things up. Before that, everybody got along, except all the white people send their kids to private school after integration. They don't go to the same school. That's not normal. You drive by on a little golf cart here to the swimming pool that's basically only for white people. It's a private swimming pool, so there's no pool here, and it's so hot. So thank God the Legacy Center drives the Black and Latino children to Helena to go to the pool. It's a beautiful pool, they have fun. But just seeing that happening, and then there is, literally when they built the town, there's a black side of town and a white side of town. That was planned from the beginning. And that just carries on. So it's really powerful. It's intense, like I said, brings up a lot of feelings. And thank you for listening to me. Yeah, questions?
I just have a quick question. I was reading about a lot of the cropland precedents, like consumed by big corporate interests, in a way kind of laundering the land theft. Do you think that the impetus for reparations should be on the descendants of the people who took the land or the people who own the land now?
Both. So some of the people who took the land in the early 1900s are still here, and their descendants are still here. Some people came after that, but they know the story, and they're still, being here and participating in the same spaces and going to the private school versus, going to the pool and doing all the things. So they should also pay. Yes, if you look up Brooks Griffin, David Brooks Griffin, which if you drive around, you'll see Griffin all over the place. He got millions of dollars in federal money to help him as a poor farmer, and other small farmers didn't get anything. If you look up who gets the most subsidies, he's on the list of like the top 5 subsidies in the country. And I recently was Googling something else, and there's a lawyer who tells people the rich people, how to get more money from the federal government for subsidies by adding their wife and their kids' names onto saying that they're all part of the farm and they're a partnership. It's really gross. Meanwhile, like I said, people lost their land for small amounts of money, and that's still happening. Today, there's stories of people who are here who are still losing their land today in 2022.
This is Dr. Yorgo Topolidis. My question to you is what is your organization's strategy for convincing individuals who self-identify as white or are externally categorized as white to contribute to the fund and to sort of acknowledge the wrongs of the past?
So we just formed in 2019 on the 400th anniversary of the first Africans who were brought here. So we actually haven't had to, or have not yet, reached out to people like Mr. Solomon or like people who we think should pay. We haven't done that. We've just been sharing that there is this fund and people have been giving. So far, that's what we've done. that is on the list of things. I think that in order for the country to heal and in order for white people to heal, you have to repair this. It's also hurting European descendant people. Like, they wouldn't ever say it, but the people at the Baptist church here that are in all white space, like, they're hurting their kids, and they deep down, they know it. Even if they will never say it, you know? So they're being harmed too, and I don't know, there's plenty of people who we will never be able to convince, but there's lots and lots of people who actually know that that this has to happen.
I'm curious from like a legal perspective, like you as a lawyer. So the thing that you mentioned about taxes and the tax potential, the way that they were like kind of pursuing the delinquent taxes, that's still very common today. So like in Alachua County, they publish like the delinquent property taxes every year. I'm curious if you know of like ways that maybe local areas are challenging that. Like, are there ways that people kind of change that so that it isn't a continued thing? And like anything to do with like heirs properties and ways that people might like keep this problem from, it's just been going on, it's still going on in such an extreme way today. So I'm just kind of curious if you know of like places or ways that people have like changed it in their local area.
Yeah, so here in Elaine, I know that some folks who are connected with the Legacy Center actually look when the list of names comes out and call people and say, hey, your name's on this list, you need to go. But you have to go to Little Rock to pay here, and not everybody has a car, and that's a long way, so you miss a day of work to go to Little Rock. And I've learned being here that the courthouse is just closed today and yesterday. So you might get to Little Rock and it might not be open. So that kind of thing goes on. But yes, so people are telling each other, that's not a systematic way, but that's how it works here. In New York, in New York City, we've been fighting to end the tax lien sales because it is taking homes mostly from, predominantly from Black families, the tax liens. And it's for small amounts of money. It's just, yeah. And then somebody buys it, and then they own the house that people have had for generations. It's really horrible. So people are doing that around the country, trying to stop those tax liens and fighting it in different ways. If you search Black land or Black farms on Google, tons and tons of things come up. Lots of people are working on this.
Hi, this is Patrick. I have a question for you. Going back to the plan that Dr. T spoke about or asked about, since there's not an exact plan, is there also a way to educate people about what had been going on since the massacre and everything leading up to it?
Not 100% sure I know what you're asking, but that's the point of the museum, is to do education here and for using that story sharing to, I don't know if you noticed the $40 million bike trail. Did you all? Okay, the bike trail is just like, to me, it's like California landed on Elaine. But if people ride on the bike trail, they would stop here and the museum would be there for them to learn the story. We've been sharing the story. We actually, on August 11th, are going to have a reflection on Zoom, trying to educate people around the country and get them to contribute directly to Elaine and try and talk about what we learned when we came. So we've been doing that kind of thing. Is that what you were asking? I'm not sure that's what you were asking.
I meant more for the people who would be contributing to the reparations. I'm sure the people who took land and the descendants are not trying to cooperate, most likely. So is there a way to reach out to them and perhaps educate them and have some kind of outreach towards, the consolidation of land?
So actually, a lot of the people who contribute to our fund are descended from people whose families enslaved people. Not necessarily here, but a lot of people are contributing because they know that their family did harm and they want to do something. So we might think that nobody would, but actually there are people who are, that is why they're giving. My family did not, but I believe in order for us to heal as a nation, we have to do this repair. There's been harm ongoing. It's still happening today. We're still being part of it just by walking around here with my skin and participating in it. So we have been doing educational sessions, but it is all by people voluntarily coming. It's not like we're approaching people yet. I think we would approach corporations first, more like people like Brooks Griffin or the Solomons, rather than individual names. But if we had a certain story where we knew that so-and-so, the Silas Craig's family took Mr. Quiney's ancestors' land, we would be open, I think, to helping to bring people to the table. There's an organization called Coming to the Table that tries to do that work, but they're not doing monetary reparations. That's what we would be trying to get to happen. Also, there actually are people whose families enslaved people who are actually putting wills and papers up on the internet so that people can search for their family stories. There are people trying to do things. It's definitely not all that needs to happen. I mean, there's so much work that needs to happen. It's going to take a long time. It took 400 years to get to this point, so some people want to just, let's give everyone a check and then it'll be done. That is not what's going to happen.
Okay, so what I wanted to do is give more of a comment towards the reparation side of this. One thing to think about is what we heard earlier about erasure of the massacre, of what happened. Once you erase that, it never happened. The bodies were not found. Where are the bodies? Oh, well, there's no bodies. That means there's no massacre. But what needs to happen first, from what I'm seeing, acknowledgement from the communities, acknowledgement from the white communities in particular, because black folks know, descendants know what happened. It's out there. Yes, that's qualitative, sure. But now with the work that you're currently doing and the organization's working towards, that provides that acknowledgement piece to actually begin that discourse of reparations. Until there's acknowledgement from the white folks to understand that this is going on, that there's actual records that shows that land ownership once belonged to the black individuals, and just because of $8 they couldn't pay, they lost hundreds of acres, in addition to this individual, such as Mr. Solomon, coming in October or a couple months later, buying out thousands of acres right after the massacre, and yet there's no acknowledgement from his end to even put up a memorial there to at least give rights to those folks. It makes you think, why doesn't he want that to happen? Mm-hmm. Because that's putting his family's name on the line, putting his land ownership on the line. So that's something to think about, and I just wanted to provide that. But thank you for all the work that you're doing and conducting. I'm glad somebody's looking into those records. It needed to be done a long time ago. Thank you.
Mr. Quiney or James, did you want to say anything?
Anyone else? Questions?
Thank you, Jennifer. Wow, you're a great audience. It's now 15 minutes to 12. James, that you plan dinner or lunch?
Yeah, but it's probably gonna be another 30 minutes.
Should we do the tour first and come back?
I think we should do the tour first.
You wanna do the tour?
Yeah, and we'll
Okay.
come back to lunch.
Okay, that sounds good to me. We will travel lane, and we will go south, and we will end up in Ferguson. There isn't very much to see. We see this, but we do see gold.
Can you tell the Crumrod story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Crumrod came along. You remember it had Crump and Rogers up here. These people were from Memphis. In fact, part of the family are still in Memphis. They're attorneys, etc. Somehow they came in and they got in on this land grabbing deal also. And as a result, they named a little town called Crump and Rogers, Crumrod. Okay, they had the money to do that. But I really don't know all of the details on it. But all I know is one day it was named Crumrod.
The same post office that was Ferguson is now Crumrod. We'll see it.
Yeah. And they put Crumrod on the postal office, and actually it should be Ferguson, because that's where the family marker was. There are a lot of trees there now where they just haven't maintained the railroad, because they've taken up all the rails and made a bike trail out of it. But my instinct can take me right back to you. So we'll go there, and prayerfully you'll have a lot of questions. Maybe I'll be able to answer, and if I can't, then well, I'm honest enough to say I don't know. Okay. So if you are ready.
How are we going to do it? I don't know.
Is that enough? Do you have enough room for Jennifer and me to ride on your van?
Great.
Okay, thank you very much. All right.
All right. We'll turn it off.
Gotta go round.
Oh.
Reparations Museum is like a church. Okay. You walk in, I've never seen a museum. I've been to the whole thing. Yeah, but this, if you go in, it's got all, everything in there, just like you do. What do you mean? You go in, you